The worldview is undergoing a huge change. I predicted extreme weather events, volcanic eruptions, and earthquakes for March. All my predictions came true. The scientific community is not interested in this because according to the current atomic model, the alignments formed by the Sun, Earth, Moon, and other planets should not affect events on Earth. It was long claimed that the full moon could not make people watch, at least not otherwise than in the way that the full moon illuminates strongly, and it could disturb falling asleep. However, there was already a lot of evidence that during the full moon, people go to bed later than normal and wake up earlier than normal. Physicists have no idea what this is based on. I assume that during straight alignments, a certain dark energy is activated and thus more energy would be available to the cells. I argue that athletes should monitor when these exceptionally straight alignments occur. That is, if they want to maximize their chances of setting their own records in the sport they practice. On October 24, central France had the heaviest heavy rains and floods in 40 years. 2 weeks later, Valencia had wild heavy rains and floods in which over 200 people died, perhaps in vain. In my opinion, these events could have been handled better. I argue that it was predictable in advance that there would be some very heavy rains and floods just when these heavy rains hit France and Valencia in October last year. After Valencia, I predicted that in 2 weeks there would be another heavy rain somewhere in Valencia, and that in 2 weeks there would be another heavy rain somewhere, and so on. These predictions of mine came true, but nobody cares if I'm right. People will continue to die in vain in the sense that they could be warned about when these heavy rains are more likely to occur. 2 weeks after Valencia, it rained heavily in Malaga. 2 weeks after that, and then it rained and a lot in Wales. 2 weeks after Wales, a snowstorm in southern Europe, which repeated 2 weeks later. 2 weeks after that, and snow fell heavily worldwide in early January. I had predicted the times of all these events correctly in advance. I had specifically highlighted the 4th of January, and that from then on it would start to happen, and then it really happened. Worse snowstorms in the USA, likewise in England and the Netherlands. Japan got a 1.5 meter snowstorm. Since October, during these events, the Earth, Moon, and Saturn were aligned very directly. And just a day after that, the Earth, Moon, and Neptune were aligned very directly. These alignments are in 2-week cycles. At the beginning of January, Mars joined, and now there were alignments through 3 different planets, and then the Santorini and Caribbean regions started to become active with earthquakes.
So the Santorini and Caribbean regions were activated at the same time, and the situation in both also calmed down at the same time. Coincidentally, these exceptionally direct alignments through the Earth, Moon, and Saturn and the Earth, Moon, and Neptune began to break up on February 25, and at the same time as the number of earthquakes began to decrease. On the 9th of January, I brought up the alignments of the 12th, 14th, and 19th of March. First Saturn most directly behind the Sun.
2 days later, the 14th of March, full moon with a total lunar eclipse. At the same time, Saturn behind the Sun on the right side and Neptune behind the Sun on the left side. So on the 14th of March, the Earth was first in the area between the Moon and Saturn. A few hours later, and the Earth was very directly between the Moon and the Sun. In the evening, the Earth was still between the Moon and Neptune in the area between. I have studied, and very often in connection with these several straight alignments, there are so-called outbreaks of dozens of tornadoes. That's what this tells us now, though. The wildest tornado outbreaks in 2 decades, and I predicted the time correctly more than 2 months in advance. Only twice had people in the Tornado Valley area been warned of a similar situation in such a big way, so they started warning about the situation as the weather started to change. Instead, I raised the possibility of very strong weather extremes already on the 9th day of January in my YouTube video, in which I go through these exceptionally direct alignments. I made dozens of similar videos in January and February. In them, I tell you how these exceptionally direct alignments will activate the Earth in such a way that the Earth's internal pressure increases steadily during them, and how this excess energy is removed from the Earth unbalancedly, often resulting in earthquakes with a delay. Naturally, the increase in the Earth's internal pressure also activates volcanoes, and they have also been activated in a predictable way. Late March, so the earthquakes were also predictable in advance. Or else it has been a matter of a great many coincidences when you think about the events of the last 6 months. Okay, if these alignments activate the Earth, then how? I assume that in the nuclei of atoms there are congestion areas of energy that is dispersed into space, which recycle the dark energy that is dispersed into space, which creates particles that can be registered, such as electrons and photons, which are still composed of energy that is dispersed into space. This dark energy that is dispersed into space is activated during the alignments, and the more strongly the straight the alignments are, physicists do not yet understand this, because the current atomic model is totally incorrect. That's why physicists still do not have a theory of everything in physics.